High availability is really for the critical applications that are essential to the operation of your business. So it all comes down to how critical is that?
Hi, this is your host Apni Bhartiya and welcome to TFL Let's Talk. Today we have with us once again Margaret Hoagland, VP of Global Sales and Marketing at SIOS Technology. Margaret, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Swap. It's nice to see you again.
It's my pleasure. And today we are going to demystify some jargon, some terms, and have better understanding when we look at the whole disaster recovery, high availability backup market. So the first question that I would like to ask you is that let's just understand the bigger high level picture of when we talk about high availability, when we talk about backup, when we talk about disaster recovery. Just explain what these terms mean.
So they're not parallel categories. They're not apples to oranges. Disaster recovery is a general term, generally meaning that in the event of a catastrophic failure on the servers and the infrastructure that are running your important applications, you're able to restore operation. And there's a number of ways of doing that. Backup is really focused on your data. So you're keeping a copy of your data, typically in an off-site location. It could be a local copy. And in the event of a failure, you're able to restore that data to servers that can then operate on it and use it. Backup is typically used to store the data, to create an archive, perhaps. Usually companies that are regulated, like healthcare, might need to store patient records for the lifetime of a patient. Might need to be able to get back very old data and use it again. Backup is a means of keeping a copy of that data in the event that you need to get it back. Getting it back and using it, however, are two different things. And so high availability is a different category. High availability is about the application high availability, and that is keeping the systems that run your critical applications up and running, and in the event of a failure, an automatic failover, it's called, to another operational system. You've kept a second full server running so that you can continue operation. So disaster recovery is a general term. High availability and backup tend to overlap a bit and are often used in conjunction with one another.
And if we look at teams, if we look at organizations, if we look at units, what kind of personas are responsible for high availability versus backup versus disaster recovery?
A lot of times the disaster recovery policies and decisions are made by the business continuity folks. They're making sure that the metrics for that company's business continuity are met, and that's one component that they need to consider. In the event of a disaster recovery, what are all the policies and the people's responsibilities and systems that need to be in place in order to restore operation of the business. Backup disaster and high availability are typically done at the IT level, IT administrators, IT directors. They may be application in a larger organization. You might have, for instance, a SQL Server team that's focused on keeping SQL Server up and running, or Oracle team. In other contexts, you may have an SAP infrastructure team that's making sure that the SAP systems are up and running. Those are the decision makers typically in a high availability environment where those applications are very, very critical to the business and the operation of that business.
You mentioned business continuity. Let's talk about what does business continuity actually mean?
So business continuity is a general term, and it means the policies, the systems, and the personal responsibilities that are all required to be coordinated in the event that there is a threat to the continuity of operation of a business. And so many organizations have a business continuity officer or a team, perhaps, who figure out if these various threats happened to our systems, what would the consequences be? And what do we need to do to set policy and document what would need to happen in the event of a catastrophic disaster? Who's responsible for what? What's the chain of command? Where are our documents held? What are our run books and documentation of our systems and policies so that you can restore operation in an orderly fashion in the chaos of a full-on flood, for example, or natural disaster, and employees are maybe scattered around. How do they protect their families and homes? How do they make sure that operation is restored to that business in a way that is protective of both the people and the data and systems involved?
And when you look at business continuity and disaster recovery, are these two separate things? Are these two faces of the same coin? Are these two different names of the same things? Or these are two different coins altogether?
Disaster recovery is a subset of business continuity, as is high availability. So the business continuity is that very large umbrella term. Disaster recovery is one of the elements that are required for business to continue, for business continuity. And high availability is one of the mechanisms used to restore operation in the event of a failure.
Can you also explain the difference between RTO, RPO, and availability and why it matters?
RTO is the recovery time objective. How fast can you restore the operation of the systems? Recovery point objective is how recent is the data that you are accessing when operation has been restored. In other words, in a backup environment where perhaps you're backing up all your data nightly, that's a common scenario. So you back up your data on Monday, you back up your data again on Tuesday night. Wednesday at noontime, you have a failure. You are able to restore data from the Tuesday night backup. You're going to lose the data that was changed or added in the time from the Tuesday night backup to the failure on Wednesday. You've accepted that as a reasonable recovery point objective. You've accepted the fact that this process is backing up at a rate that you can afford and handle. You're storing data at a reasonable amount, but you're taking a risk of losing some of that data. Recovery time objective is a measure of how quickly you're restoring operation. And so in a high availability environment, that's just a momentary pause of operation. Whereas in a backup environment, you have to restore all that data. You've also lost that period of time where you are restoring it back and bringing all those servers back up online. In terms of disaster recovery, that's a more general term that simply means that you have a mechanism for restoring operations and data from usually a geographically distant location that's not affected by a site-wide disaster. And so disaster recovery is used in the context of both backup and high availability to restore data and operation in the event of a catastrophic failure. So availability is measured in terms of how many nines of availability. So if 100% operation all the time is the goal for your application availability, how many minutes of downtime have you incurred in 1 year is measured in approximations of that 100%. And so by definition, a high availability environment is 99.99% uptime, so less than an hour of downtime total in a year. So backup isn't typically measured in terms of availability because it's not, you can't just restore to empty servers. Backup is typically measured, the concern, the focus area is the recovery point objective Are you taking those backups frequently enough that you can restore to a point that is acceptable to your business and you haven't lost much data? So essentially, backup is really focused on the data, and application availability is focused on the operation of the application. They both require a mechanism of replication, and that's typically the source of confusion. But the type of replication they are using and what that replication does is very different.
Can you also talk about the difference between backup and availability?
The point of backup is to protect your data and to make it accessible for recovery of that data. It's typically done in a method that uses recovery points, so designated points in that over time as you're backing up data that you can restore to. So you can restore a day's data or a month's data. High availability is more concerned with the operation of the servers and the operating system and the network and all of the mechanisms necessary to keep an application up and running. And so its point is to allow continuous operation from the end user's perspective, to make sure that you are automatically able to recover from an incident without manual intervention or downtime of any kind.
Can you talk about the backup versus replication? What is the difference there?
So both backup, the term backup and the term replication, essentially, and in high availability as well, there is a mechanism of replication, basically making a copy of your data. And so backup is making a copy of your data using replication and storing it. There are different mechanisms for doing that. Now, in a high availability environment, you also use replication, particularly if there is a SANless means of providing high availability. So essentially, you take two servers, you use local storage on each, and you replicate the storage from one operational server to the other in a synchronized manner, so that if there is a failure of that primary server that your application is running on, the operation moves over to the secondary server, which is accessing an identical copy of the data that the primary server was running on. Therefore, you don't miss anything. Your RTO and RPO are near zero, and you just continue to operate. That is a mechanism, a type of replication that's typically host-based block level replication. So it's moving that data very, very quickly, very efficiently over the network. In a backup environment, you're using a different type of data replication. You're using a replication that's more concerned with these recovery points. And so that allows you to recover just the time frame that you're interested in. And that mechanism is not as concerned with the synchronized requirement for a high availability environment. So it's a different type of replication, but that replication term gets thrown around and is often a source of confusion.
Another term that we use is IT resiliency. What is IT resiliency? And once again, if you can do, hey, these are subsets that are part of it.
IT resiliency is the ability for an IT system to self-heal or to recover operation. In some cases, it can do that on its own. In some cases, it requires a secondary step or measure to bring back operation. But in effect, it's a general term for that ability to absorb a threat, a downtime risk, and to continue to operate.
When we look at all these practices, whether it's backup, replication, IT resiliency, business continuity, let's do an analogy with automobile. Are these things like airbags, or are these things like engines and wheels that drive the car? So from business perspective, what is the importance of these practices?
High availability is really for the critical applications that are essential to the operation of your business. So it all comes down to how critical is that? And they are not just an airbag, they are the the life support system, if you will. They are even more critical than an airbag. They keep you running all the time. The backup system is more like the spare tire. You need to stop, reconfigure some things, and bring that operation back online. So it's essential. No one wants to drive around without a spare tire in the back, but it's not the same as the oxygen in the room.
And now, when we look at these practices, especially high availability, is it only for data centers on-prem, or you also need this for public cloud or cloud native environments?
Great question, Swap. We're asked this often, and there is a great deal of confusion because cloud vendors typically provide an SLA, a service level agreement for high availability, but they're providing to the customer infrastructure, so hardware and systems. They're not providing application high availability. So the answer is yes, you need a high availability solution for your application that is over top and separate from the SLA provided by the cloud, because there are many, many circumstances where an application will fail and the cloud server node will continue to operate. So they will have met their SLA, but your application is offline. So yes, you need high availability in the cloud.
Can you also talk about, what is the difference between when we talk about SLAs and we talk about 4 nines, 3 nines, 5 nines?
So SLAs can mean a lot of things, and they're measured in a number of ways. In the availability space and the application availability space, nines are a measure of how close to 100% operational and accessible is an application. And so often companies set an SLA for a given number of nines. High availability is by definition 4 nines of availability, so 99.99% up and running in a given year, so less than an hour of downtime in a year. Those are the metrics by which an IT system team is often measured in terms of how well they're doing in keeping the systems up and running. The SLA is more that general agreement to provide that level of service. The SLAs for application versus infrastructure are different. So 4 nines of availability for an application presumes that everything underneath it, all of the systems and network and operating system and various components that are required for an application to be up and running are operational and compatible and accessible. So it's a stricter requirement at the application level than it is at the lower level of infrastructure.
One more question I want to ask you is that when we look at a superset of business continuity or high availability, is it purely for business continuity, or there are some regulatory requirements also where organizations need to have these practices in place?
There are regulatory requirements, and depending on the industry, you may be required to restore data, restore applications, restore operation within a given time frame in order to protect the operation of critical systems. And so depending on the vertical industry or the state or state or environment that you're in. For example, in healthcare, you may need to store data and recover it very quickly because the requirement is that you can access critical patient data within a certain time frame. Often the regulatory requirements are very general and subject to interpretation. And so the specific number of nines required and the specific RTO and RPO varies widely depending on your interpretation and the industry and the specific regulatory wording.
Are there industries which, for them, high availability strategy, business conditions, they are really critical versus other industries where it's like nice to have?
The short answer is there isn't a law that says you are required to have high availability. But there are use cases where the application is so essential to the operation of a business that it would be a catastrophic loss to that business for even a few minutes of downtime. For example, in a manufacturing plant, big ERP systems like the SAP systems, if that system goes offline for even a short period of time, you think about the consequences of you can't take in orders, your production line fails, your deliveries don't go out on time. The domino effect of all the different systems that are affected by those complex environments, it could be catastrophic to the business actual viability with only a very short period of downtime. Healthcare systems are also very critical for obvious reasons. If you can't access patient records, if the patient records that you access are old or outdated, you are actually holding someone's life in your hands. And so high availability for these patient record systems is very, very important. And the applications that are running these systems, both in healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, they are all about the criticality of that application, more so than the individual industry that we're talking about. So high availability is used across a variety of industries and used in those highly critical application environments.
Margaret, thank you so much for taking time out today and explain these terminologies. I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to a next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Swap. Appreciate it.